Greetings, Acolyte, and welcome back to the Ordo Grigio, the Emperor's secret society against the enemy that is unpainted models. Today we revisit an old project and finally finish my Blood Angels Plague Marine Raptors. While I give the models a quick dry brush of pure red from Army Painter, it's probably time to explain why I'm painting models I painted 6 months ago. I originally printed these models for a Dornian Heresy Blood Angels force for a 3rd edition 40k campaign. However, after painting one up for a video a while back, I got a little distracted with other projects. Imperial Guard, Space Wolves, Pig Orcs. It's a problem. Over time and using them in skirmishes, I realised the whole bolter thing wasn't really working out for them, and didn't make much sense for space pirate, vampire, diseasey dudes to be carrying an assault rifle when they're always on the move and lose the benefit of the bolter's extra range. Plus they were lacking something to distinguish them from Death Guard and mark them as Blood Angels. So I chopped all their arms off, except for the champions, and replaced them with a bolt pistol and chainsword combo. And I also added on some new shoulder pads with the Blood Angels icon, combining maybe 4 different model kits from Cults 3D. So once they were assembled, I primed them with a mix of pure red and my Vallejo black primer to give them a dark red undertone, which would form the shadow for across the model. For the dry brush I used a cheap makeup brush from Amazon and worked the paint into the bristles of the brush, and as you can see, moved it back and forward across the model to catch the raised surfaces, while leaving the black red as the shadow. I wanted these models to have a dark, gritty undertone, being the evil character of the campaign, so I'll be mostly using muted or warm tones for the model, and some new ideas. However, I think it may have left the model lacking a little depth in the end. You'll have to let me know. Dry brushing is a fairly easy technique and really helps to add a lot of depth quickly to a model. Handy when you're starting painting on a Friday night for models you need complete by Saturday lunchtime. Once the whole squad has been dry brushed, they look like this. Next up is Pink Horror from Citadel, possibly the most vibrant colour to touch these models today. And I use this for all the tentacles, tongues and fleshy growths across the model, much like I did on the Demon Prince a few weeks ago. As always, I thin the paint slightly and begin layering it on any of the details I can find on the first pass. On Death Guard, the pink tentacles serve as quite a drastic contrast to colour from the muted greens and brass colours. However, on the predominantly red Blood Angels, they sort of fade in with the rest of the model, which helps here when it comes to the flesh of the demon wings, almost blending them into the backpack. Though overall, I think it could have done with being something a bit further from the red on the colour wheel. Though being such a similar colour to the red, I was able to leave some of the dark red prime in the recesses to add a bit more depth to the larger pink areas, leaving the models looking a little like this. I move on to Leather Brown from Army Painter, again thinned slightly with water, and apply this to any of the bone areas, such as this guy's knee skull, which only makes sense on a Chaos model I guess, and any horns or teeth on the models. Also definitely didn't realise whilst writing this that I forgot to go back and paint in the string hanging down from this guy's crotch. Painted now. With the prime of the models being a mix, and me being notoriously inconsistent with my mixing, I was being fairly careful here not to get any of the brown onto the red of the model, and again allowed some of the prime to sit in the recesses. One of my plans for later was to use a different wash than I normally do, which is a bit softer, so the extra depth in these steps would really help keep the contrast in the finished model. With surprisingly little bones to paint, we can move on to the next step. Bugman's Glow from Citadel. I use this for all the tabards, loincloths and capes. I wanted these to look like cloth taken from human skin, given the Blood Angels need to drink blood almost constantly. It would make sense that the most common leather available to them would be human skin. I kind of imagine the corrupted Blood Angels similar to Reavers from Firefly, or Serenity if you've only seen the film. Their ships in disrepair, reactors leaking, and the decks full of grim scenes of mutilation, and the warriors decked in the flayed skin of the weak. Lovely singing voices though. As with the other colours so far, I can leave the prime in the recesses as the colour tone is close enough to be a deep shadow. On the champion's ragged cloak, I also apply a second layer, covering slightly less area just to add a bit more shade and highlight to it. With the flesh done, they look a bit flat and I wanted to introduce some brighter colours, though they won't be too bright in the end. Celestial Grey from Citadel is next. Where the pink was used for the fleshy tubes, this grey is used for the more mechanical tubes, such as on the chainswords and backpacks and some of the helmets. This grey is closer to an off-white, and while it's quite bright here, it takes tinting from washes really well. I was tempted at this point to use this colour for the Blood Angel symbol on the shoulder pads, but looking at the Blood Angels, this logo is predominantly painted black or a darker colour in general, so picking it out like this didn't seem quite right. Probably would have looked a bit out of place and more like a Loyalist shoulder pad, so I think this was the right choice in the end. Now I couldn't paint up some Plague Marines without using the next colour, Death Guard Green. I think the name says it all. Like the pink contrasted with the green of the Death Guard, perhaps the green will contrast with the red and pink of the Blood Angels. I use this for the fleshy part of the wings on the 4 Raptors who have wings, applying it in thin coats as with the other colours. Being quite a pale colour over a fairly dark base, the coverage is pretty poor, so it took a couple of layers to get a good coat. Though I didn't try too hard to avoid leaving lines and brush marks, as these would serve to add in a little texture to the flat skin. These wings were originally designed for Night Lord Raptors, however, given the overt vampire themes of the Blood Angels, especially corrupted ones, I figured big leathery bat-like wings would be suitably thematic, though perhaps not a universal mutation amongst the Raptors, which is why I left 3 with their original jump packs. As with all Chaos factions, in my head anyway, some will embrace the gifts of the Dark Gods more easily than others, leading to the mixture of demonic wings and jump packs carrying these corrupted warriors over the battlefield on their raids for fresh blood. Next I mixed up plate mail metal and matte black in a 50-50 ratio for all the banding and metallics of the models. If you've seen other videos, you may have heard me say how Lead Belcher is my favourite metallic silver. However, I think I may have changed my mind, for Chaos models at least. I tried this mix out because, like before, I knew their base would be metallic. I planned Lead Belcher for that, so I wanted a metallic that was different. The darker metallics also link back to the artwork I've seen of corrupted Blood Angels, and I think it helps root them in the evil realm of paint jobs. This was probably the longest step in the entire process, as I had to go carefully to avoid the red of the armour while painting the banding on the legs and other portions of the armour. You could realistically paint these before the armour, but as I wanted to do an all over dry brush, I chose to do the banding afterwards. When I got to the shoulder pads, I also painted the Blood Angels icon in this dark metallic, which, while more subtle than the grey, I think is more on brand with their image. Avalon Sunset comes out quickly, after a quick touch up of areas I noticed I'd missed while painting the other steps. I use this to paint all the lenses on the models, most of which are on this one Raptor's helmet, which you may also recognise if you've seen the Demon Prince video. I switched out to a smaller brush here so I could get into the small slits for the eyes. I chose yellow to keep it in the warm tones, though I was very close to going with a bright blue for a contrasting colour. Rakarth Flesh is next for a quick highlight on all the bone areas I painted brown earlier, including the ever puzzling knee skull. With this highlight I leave some of the brown showing underneath as a shadow, and whilst it looks a little harsh here, after a wash and from tabletop distance, it blends together and doesn't look so bad. On the horns and bone growth on the champion, I covered around half the bone with this colour, aiming the lighter colour on the uppermost portions of the bone, to simulate where the light would hit and where the bone was drying out as it pushes out of the Blood Angel's corrupted flesh and armour. Normally when highlighting bone I use Zandri dust in between the leather brown and the Rakarth flesh. However, I wanted to stay away from the warmer mid-tone of the Zandri dust and move towards the dry, desaturated colour of the Rakarth flesh, making the highlight easiest to read from a distance and bringing these more to an off-white, which also helps them look more aged and decaying rather than a healthy bone you'd expect to see. Mechanicus Standard Grey comes out for a rare appearance on the channel. I use this for the casings of the weapons. I chose a mid to dark tone grey here to bring out a bit more of a utilitarian look to the model. Whilst they may be blood-drinking, diseased space vampires, I imagine they would see weapons merely as a tool of war, rather than through the religious lens the Imperium sees them through. And being fleet-based pirates, most of the equipment would be old or looted, so would either have the iconography removed or just be painted over in a flat grey. As long as a bolter fires or a chainsword revs up, that's good enough for them. In the Dornian Heresy lore, the vast majority of Blood Angel's equipment has fallen into disrepair, and they rely mostly on slaves with a little technological knowledge to keep all their equipment working, so looting battlefield equipment wouldn't be too much of a stretch. The next step is an all-over wash of Athonian camo shade. In the last video I talked about using Drushy Violet was one of the few times I had used a wash other than black or brown, and using that wash gave me the idea to use it here, but rather than using it over a green, over the whole model. The idea that was, as well as shading the entire model, using a green wash would add a sickly, grungy tint to the whole model, especially where we used the Celestria Grey. This was also inspired by some of the artwork on the Dornian Heresy fandom wiki, where shades of green are used as shadows for a corrupted Blood Angel, and I wanted to recreate the feel of that artwork, even just a little bit. I also had the idea to dry brush the pure red over a military green base coat to achieve this, but on test models I didn't like how it looked. Fire Giant Orange speed paint next for all the areas we painted yellow earlier, all 9 of this Raptor's eyes. To add some depth and bring some colour back into these lenses, the plan was to make the lenses look a bit like a light source, though I think they may have turned out a little too dark. Another speed paint, High Lord Blue, is used much in the same way as it was in the Iron Warrior Captain video, but on the Champion's Power Fist. I coat the claws with this paint to leave them a metallic blue, and I also included the orb in the centre of the fist. I imagine this as the exposed power core in the centre of the fist itself, but the technical knowledge to repair the casing has been lost in time amongst the fleet. I think this is a pretty easy way to represent the energy field that surrounds power weapons, though it would probably work better on a brighter silver. Death Guard Green comes out again for a highlight on the wings where we used it before. I thin this by wetting my brush and dipping it into the pot, wiping it on the rim to test the consistency. I leave the paint fairly translucent here so I can re-establish the colour and remove any patchiness from where the wash has settled. As always with layering on a highlight like this, I try to be mindful of the direction of my brush, as more pigment will be deposited at the end of the brush stroke, leaving that area brighter. I follow the same process with Pink Horror, re-establishing the pink in the brighter areas of the tentacles and demonic flesh. Where areas are fairly flat, I focus on the higher parts of the shape to simulate natural lighting, and on areas where there is texture, I just follow the shape of the texture, so the highlights are subtle but sensibly placed. Finally, Avalon Sunset comes back out for a spot highlight on all the lenses, just dotting it in the centre to be the brightest spot of the glow. Imagine being a guardsman having one of these board your ship in the middle of space and charging down the corridor at you, yellow lenses glowing at you out the dark, knowing only horror awaits you. With the lenses highlighted and the base is complete, they're done. So there we are, rearmed and repainted Blood Angels Plague Marine Raptors, ready to raid the Imperium for victims to fuel their ever-growing hunger for blood. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions for future videos, I'd love to hear them down in the comment section below, and I'll see you all next time.